A thin strip of light cuts across the hallway as he smiles like nothing's wrong, and the moment freezes around us in a way that feels too deliberate to be accidental, as though the house itself is holding its breath. The metallic shadow on the floor, the object that shouldn't matter but suddenly does, stretches between us like a narrow, cold accusation warping slightly as I shift my weight and feel the fibers of the rug under my shoes. I keep my voice level, trying not to reveal the tight coil forming beneath my ribs, because something in his expression feels staged, like he rehearsed the tilt of his chin and the softness in his eyes. I narrate what I see with the precision of someone afraid to misinterpret anything, the faint shake in his hand that he hides by sliding it into his pocket, the way he stands half in the light and half in silhouette, the exact angle of his shoulders, as if he expects a confrontation I haven't started. He asks if everything is okay, the question floating in the air with a strange weight that makes it sound less like concern and more like an assessment. I answer simply, keeping my tone even, but internally I track how his eyes linger on my face, scanning for something: irritation, fear, instability, anything he can classify and tuck into some private ledger. The heater hums in short bursts, the only sound that breaks the stillness, and the faint warmth brushing my arm contrasts sharply with the cool distance in his gaze. I move a little farther into the hallway, and the light shifts across the wall, narrowing into a thin blade that catches the edge of a framed photo. He steps forward, blocking part of the beam, and his smile widens, too calm, too patient. The air feels heavy with something I can't name yet, something that makes the back of my neck prickle, as if the house senses the tension whether I acknowledge it or not. His voice softens when he repeats the question, and for a moment, I feel the walls closing in, not physically but perceptually, as though the space has grown smaller by a few inches without warning. My thoughts sharpen in response, noting the rhythm of his breaths and the faint hitch that appears when I do not immediately give him what he wants. I ask what he's smiling about, and the way he shrugs feels wrong, like it's a gesture borrowed from a script meant to imply harmlessness. Calm faces can hide the sharpest intentions when the room pretends nothing has changed. The words cross my mind before I can filter them, filling me with a silence that feels too loud, too present. I take another step, and the metallic shadow seems to stretch with me, lengthening into a dark ribbon that links us in a way I wish it wouldn't. I catch the faintest scent of cold air from the slightly open window near the stairwell, and the draft carries with it the sense that this quiet moment is the surface of something deeper. He asks if I want to talk, the question coded in something sweet that sets my teeth on edge, and I respond lightly, keeping my voice steady, because something tells me that any tremor, any hesitation, would register as a point in a game. I don't know he's playing yet. The light flickers slightly as a cloud moves outside, changing his silhouette, making his shadow bend in an unsettling direction that doesn't match the angle of the hallway lamp. For a brief second, it looks like his shadow tilts toward me while his body stays perfectly still, and I blink once, grounding myself with the feel of my fingertips grazing the doorknob behind me. He tilts his head, studying the movement as if he expected me to react differently, and the way he watches me feels like he's recording something invisible. I ask if he needs anything, and he replies with a softness that doesn't match the firmness in his eyes, a split-second dissonance that chills me more than the draft. The heater clicks off, leaving the silence exposed, and I feel the moment hanging between us like a thin strand ready to snap. I remind myself to breathe evenly, to not let the silence stretch too long, because I can feel him monitoring it. He steps back half an inch, an action too subtle for anyone else to notice, but to me, it reads like the reset of a chess piece returning to its marked square. I say I'm going to put away my bag, and he nods with slow, almost indulgent understanding. I walk past him, feeling the warmth of the light against one side of my face and the cold slip of shadow across the other. Even the softest glow can expose a lie when someone stands too perfectly within it. I don't look back until I reach the end of the hallway, and when I do, his shadow is still tilted wrong against the wall, as if it's trying to warn me without breaking its shape. The thin strip of light trembles along the floor, as though the house itself knows something I don't yet, and the part closes on the quiet sense that the moment I cross that line, nothing in this hallway, this house, or this marriage would ever feel simple again. The light shakes against the wall, and the silence tightens around us like held breath. I woke to a soft, colorless morning and the muted hum of traffic outside the window. The kind of Portland gray that made everything look slightly blurred at the edges, and before the air had fully settled around me, I heard my own voice say, "I'm Emily Carver, 34, a hospital administrative coordinator from Portland, Oregon, as if grounding myself in the facts of who I was, could steady whatever had begun to shift beneath the surface of my life. The kitchen tiles felt cold under my feet when I walked in to start the coffee, the familiar routine briefly comforting, until I noticed the faint sheen on the cabinet door, the way the surface bent the light in a direction that didn't make sense. And without thinking, I murmured the thought that had been lingering since that hallway moment. Glass catches a faint distortion. Nathan hadn't come downstairs yet, and the silence carried a stiff, expectant quality that made the ordinary clinking of the spoon against the mug feel too loud, too exposed. When he finally appeared, his greeting landed with that shallow warmth he used when he was watching me more than talking to me, and his eyes traced my face for a little too long before he asked if I'd slept well. His tone dipped in an artificial concern that brushed my skin like a cold draft. I answered lightly and kept moving through the kitchen, my internal voice taking careful note of every shift in his expression, every unnecessary tilt of his head, the way he asked about my schedule, as if checking for inconsistencies. The glass reflection near the sink caught my attention again when he stepped behind me, the warped angle of his body in the surface making it seem like there were two versions of him standing there, one smiling, one waiting. My thumb tapped against my wrist in that tiny, unconscious rhythm I hated admitting was a stress tic, and he noticed it immediately, asking if I was nervous about something. I told him no, but the question clung to the air like a sticky residue. At work, the fluorescent lighting sharpened every edge of my thoughts, and the steady beep of badge scanners echoed through the hallways as I processed paperwork with mechanical efficiency, trying to shake off the lingering sensation that the morning had been part of some test I couldn't see. Lila texted me during a quick break asking if I wanted to try a new cafe this weekend, and I almost said yes automatically before remembering the way Nathan had reacted to my last spontaneous plan, reminding me that keeping track of things isn't your strong suit lately. His comment replayed in my head as I typed out a brief yes to her message, and for a moment I felt the weight of something forming around me, like a net being pulled together from threads too thin to notice until they tightened. That afternoon, Nathan sent me a message that was so sweet it felt like a correction, like he was preemptively rewriting whatever version of himself I might have carried into the day. I reread it twice, sensing the mismatch between his warmth on screen and his cool assessment that morning. When I got home, the kitchen counters gleamed more than usual, as though someone had wiped them down recently, and the living room felt curated pillows, rearranged blanket, folded magazines aligned as if prepared for a photograph instead of use. Nathan stood near the window talking on the phone in a tone too measured, too deliberate, and even though he lowered his voice when he noticed me, I caught the faint ending of a sentence about her mood. I asked who he'd been talking to, and he offered an answer that was smooth, but not convincing, something about a work client, though his posture tightened just enough to feel like a tell. I walked past him toward the hallway, and for a brief moment the afternoon sun cut through the window in a harsh line that threw his shadow across me, stretching longer than his actual frame, the same unnatural tilt I'd seen before. That sensation, the one I couldn't name yet, rose like a quiet alarm. He came toward me and asked in that calm, careful cadence how my day was, but I heard the evaluation beneath the question, the subtle request for proof that my answer would align with whatever version of me he had been constructing. I kept my tone even and described my day in the simplest terms, refusing to give him anything he could twist. Sometimes the softest questions are just disguises for the sharpest doubts. The air between us thinned, and I sensed him cataloging every detail of my response. I moved into the living room and paused near the glass cabinet again, watching the reflection bend around us with the faintest ripple, like it was echoing the hidden tension he kept pushing into the space between our words. He stepped closer, lowering his voice with an almost tender edge as he asked if I'd been feeling overwhelmed lately, and the question pressed against me like a hand on the back of my neck, guiding me toward an interpretation I hadn't agreed to. I told him I was fine, but I could feel his disappointment at my stability, his careful recalibration as he filed the moment away. The late afternoon light shifted again, brushing against the cabinet glass and dragging his distorted reflection across mine, merging our outlines into a warped silhouette that made my stomach twist. I excused myself and stepped toward the bedroom, needing air, needing space, needing the world to stop bending around the edges. Even the quietest distortions can reveal who's trying to reshape your reality. I stopped in the doorway, watching his reflection instead of his face, and the outline of his shadow flickered against the wall as though something in the house trembled with me. The glass wavered once more, and the day closed with the sense that an invisible framework had snapped into place around me, tightening in ways I could finally feel. The reflection shivered faintly in the dimming light, hinting that something had already begun to break. I remember the rain that afternoon, the kind that drummed steadily against the car roof, as if urging me to notice something I kept trying to ignore. And when I pulled into the driveway earlier than planned, because a department-wide training had been canceled, the sky hung low and colorless, sagging with unshed weight. My fingers felt numb from the cold as I reached for my house keys, and the moment the trembling keys slid between my fingertips, I noticed the way it shook just a little in my grip. Not from the wind, not from the temperature, but from something deeper, threading itself through my nerves before I even understood what it was warning me about. I stepped into the house quietly, the way I always did when I didn't want to disturb the stillness, but today the silence didn't feel calm. It felt curated, arranged into place like a staged living room in a catalog. The air was too still, too balanced, and the hallway was dim except for the thin line of light leaking from the living room window where the blinds hadn't fully closed. My shoes left soft prints on the entryway tile, and the scent of faint detergent lingered as if someone had cleaned recently, though I hadn't asked him to. I set my bag down and noticed something strange right away. Nathan's phone sat on the kitchen counter, a place he never left it, not even when he showered. It buzzed once with a soft vibration that felt almost accusatory in the quiet room. I shouldn't have looked at the screen, but the notification previewed itself without being touched, and the moment I saw it, the inside of my chest tightened. It was a screenshot ref HX14 timestamped 09:17 p.m. sent to him from an unknown number, and the image displayed a message supposedly from me. Except it wasn't mine. The tone was off sharp and emotional in a way I had never written the punctuation wrong, the spacing uneven as though someone had tried to mimic my voice and missed the cadence. I tapped the trembling key against the counter unconsciously, the metallic sound slicing the silence before I caught myself. My heart hit a heavier rhythm as I studied the screenshot more closely, noting that the background color of the messaging app didn't match mine, and the timestamp didn't align with where I had been that night. The realization settled through me like a lead weight someone had fabricated this. Someone close. The kitchen clock ticked in an unsteady rhythm as I placed his phone back exactly where it had been angling it, so he wouldn't know it had shifted. Footsteps sounded outside, too, measured to be casual, and a moment later, Nathan entered through the front door, pausing when he saw me standing near the counter. "You're home early," he said, with a tone that wrapped itself in staged surprise, but his eyes flashed with something like calculation before softening into concern. I brushed rain from my sleeves and nodded, watching how he watched me, how his gaze moved up and down my face like he was cataloging anything he could use. "Training got canceled," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He stepped inside, fully setting his keys down gently, the sound too controlled for someone caught off guard. "How are you feeling?" he asked, and I couldn't tell if he meant physically or emotionally. The ambiguity felt intentional. I moved past him into the living room, narrating my internal thoughts with clipped clarity. I didn't dare speak aloud, and he followed with a slow, steady stride that made me feel cornered, even though he hadn't touched me. When he commented that I looked tense again, I felt the trembling key in my pocket press coldly against my thigh, as though reminding me not to answer too quickly. I told him I was fine, and his lips pressed into a strange line, almost disappointed. A knock at the door saved me from his stare, and when I opened it, Lila stood there holding a to-go coffee cup and wearing a tired smile that brightened when she saw me. She lifted the drink toward me and laughed softly about being in the neighborhood, unaware of the tension stretching thin behind me. Nathan stepped into the doorway beside me, placing a hand lightly against my back in a gesture meant to look affectionate, but I felt the pressure of his palm like a stage direction, guiding me into a scene I hadn't agreed to perform. Lila blinked at the stiffness between us and asked how we were doing, her voice higher than usual because she sensed something was off. Nathan answered before I could, telling her I'd had a rough morning emotionally, and the words made my blood run cold. I turned toward him slowly, expecting to see a joking smirk or a hint of teasing, but instead his expression held perfect sincerity, the kind that would convince anyone who didn't know better. Lila's eyebrows knit together as she glanced at me silently, asking if it was true, and I forced a small smile to keep the moment from collapsing. "I'm fine," I said. But Nathan's soft sigh behind me undercut the truth with manufactured worry. Lila didn't stay long, sensing the tension she couldn't decode, and when she left, Nathan closed the door with a gentleness that felt like a warning. He turned toward me and said he'd been worried about my reactions lately, phrasing it so carefully that it sounded like he was offering help rather than tightening a noose. Something inside me snapped awake. I asked him what reactions he meant, and he responded with vague references to conversations I didn't remember having, claiming I'd gotten upset at dinner the night before, even though we'd eaten quietly in front of the TV without a single raised voice. When I pointed out the discrepancy, he tilted his head sympathetically, like my confusion was the evidence. The trembling key pressed harder in my pocket as I walked away from him, feeling his eyes follow me, reading me, shaping me. The house felt smaller than it had that morning, the air thicker, and as I climbed the stairs, I realized that fracture had already formed a thin crack running through the trust I hadn't realized was built on something so fragile. At the top step, I paused, hearing him move downstairs with quiet, confident steps, and I felt the shift deep inside me, the moment when suspicion became certainty that something was being constructed around me, something dangerous and deliberate. A grocery store at 5:42 p.m. should feel ordinary fluorescent lights, hum of refrigerators, scattered chatter. But the moment we step inside, the world tightens around me in a way that feels pre-scripted, as if the sliding doors weren't opening to welcome us, but to unveil a stage Nathan had been preparing long before I realized there was an audience. The flickering bulb above the self-checkout area sputters unevenly, blinking hard enough to make the shadows on the linoleum shudder, and I feel the weight of that light as he walks just half a step behind me, close enough that anyone watching might think he's guiding me instead of tracking me. I grip the shopping cart handle, grounding myself in the cool metal as the loudspeaker announces a sale on cereal, but Nathan reaches forward, takes the cart from my hands with a smile too gentle to be real, and says he'll push it. That smile triggers the unease I've been carrying for weeks. I watch him pick up a box of crackers and set it in the cart, then pick it back up almost immediately, turning it toward me with a puzzled frown as he says, "Didn't you say you wanted these yesterday?" His tone lands lightly, but the question pricks like a hidden needle. I never mentioned crackers. I tell him that steady and calm, but he tilts his head as if sensing an emotional wobble I don't have. "Maybe you forgot," he suggests loud enough for a woman browsing soup cans to glance over. I feel her eyes linger on my face, and for a second the world tilts, not physically but perceptually, the way it does when a lie is forming in the air. I shake my head lightly and say no again, and Nathan's responding sigh is soft, defeated, almost theatrical. He sets the crackers back on the shelf with exaggerated care and pats my arm as though appeasing a child. Heat rises in my cheeks, not from shame, but from the knowledge that he's crafting a moment shaping the scene around me. When we reach the self-checkout area, the flickering bulb above sputters again, flashing hard enough that the tile beneath us looks like a shifting mosaic. Nathan selects a bag of apples and scans them slowly, then pauses to look at me with a carefully worried expression as he says, "You seem off today. Want to sit down?" The man at the machine beside us glances up at the tone, then at me, then back at the machine with a smirk of quiet curiosity. I tell Nathan I'm fine, my voice level, but he responds by brushing my shoulder with a tenderness I know is meant to look like comfort to anyone watching. Two teenage girls near the snacks pause mid-conversation to observe us. The bulb flickers again, making Nathan's expression seem strangely split between compassion and calculation in the fractured light. I step away from the cart to breathe, but Nathan follows immediately, placing himself just slightly in front of me, as though shielding me from something invisible. You're overreacting," he murmurs the words designed to carry just far enough for the nearby shoppers to hear. I stare at him stunned, because I haven't raised my voice, moved abruptly, or shown anything besides measured calm, but the way he speaks reframes my steadiness as instability with surgical precision. I tell him quietly that I'm not overreacting, but he shakes his head with the tired patience of someone managing a fragile person. "It's okay," he says softly. "I know it's been a lot for you lately." The sentence lands like a push in the center of my chest. A woman holding a basket slows her steps as she passes us, her eyes flicking between Nathan's gentle concern and my stillness, and I can feel her forming an impression without ever hearing the real story. Then I notice the teenager near the gum aisle, all black hoodie phone partially lifted, subtly angling the screen in our direction. Evidence number 2, angle tag 02A. My stomach drops. Nathan is performing and the camera is catching it. The realization hits with a cold, quiet horror that spreads through my ribs like frost. I move back to the cart, gripping it with both hands to keep steady. But he matches my pace, stepping close enough that our shadows merge under the flickering bulb. I tell him calmly to please lower his voice, and he responds with a soft, pained, "See, this is what I mean." The sentence slices through me. A man in a gray jacket stops pretending to check price tags and watches openly now. Nathan leans toward me, voice warm and low, but the phrasing skewed just enough to imply he's soothing someone unraveling. "It's okay. Let's just get through the list, all right?" Each word is gentle poison. I feel heat rising behind my eyes, not tears, just a furious clarity, as I realize he's controlling not just the narrative, but the environment itself, bending the perception of strangers to match the version of me he's been building. I straighten my posture, slow my breathing, and keep my tone even as I tell him we should just finish and go home. And I see it, the disappointment flicker in his eyes, faint but real, when I refuse to give him the reaction he's baiting me for. The bulb buzzes loudly overhead, then snaps back into its flickering rhythm. In the freezer door to my right, a warped reflection stares back his steady posture, my tense shoulders, the shadow between us stretching long and uneven. The distortion makes it look like I'm the one off balance. That's when the truth clicks into place inside me like a lock turning. This moment is not an accident. This is Exhibit A in whatever story he's piecing together about me. The air feels elastic, stretched thin, straining around the silent verdicts forming in the minds of strangers who don't know me. Nathan places a guiding hand on the small of my back again, but this time the pressure is firmer, almost imperceptibly insistent, steering the story as much as the movement. I step out of his reach, and he lets his hand fall slowly, letting the gesture read like I'm pulling away in distress. Another perfect move. The bulb flickers twice more hard enough to make my eyes ache, and I feel the humiliation burn low in my stomach, not because of the scene, but because I can feel the architecture of his manipulation now brick by brick. I grip the cart tighter to keep from shaking, and the part closes with a final chilling awareness he isn't reacting to me. He's directing me, and the store, the people, the flickering light, they're all props in a script he's already started writing. The house was too quiet when we got home, the kind of quiet that didn't settle, but hovered waiting for someone to make the wrong move. I walked through the living room with the dazed heaviness of someone who had been pushed onto a stage without warning, replaying the grocery store scene in my mind with sickening clarity, the flickering bulb, the eyes following us. The phone angled toward me, the way Nathan pressed a story into the air with every gentle, poisonous line. The door clicked shut behind us, and the sound echoed strangely, like it didn't belong in our home. Nathan slipped past me, humming under his breath as if nothing had happened. The sound grated. It was too light, too unconcerned, and it left a bitter taste on my tongue. I headed down the hallway toward our bedroom, needing space, needing silence that wasn't curated by him. The hallway lights buzzed faintly, the electrical hum brushing my nerves raw. When I reached the bedroom, I stopped short. The top drawer of the dresser was open just slightly, but enough to catch the corner of my eye. A half-open drawer was never an accident in this house. Nathan was obsessively tidy. He closed things fully or left them untouched. There was no in-between, not unless he meant it to look that way. I stepped closer, feeling the air shift around me heavier near the dresser, as though the drawer itself was exhaling something I wasn't meant to breathe in. My fingertips brushed the edge of the wood before I pulled it open the rest of the way. Inside shirts were stacked too neatly, like they'd been recently rearranged, and tucked into the center of the pile was a printed calendar page. I didn't recognize it immediately, just a faint hint of colored boxes marking appointments, but when I looked closer, a cold tremor traveled down my spine. The timestamp printed at the bottom read 12:37 p.m., but I remember checking the time on my phone that day. It was 12:43. 6 minutes. Not much, but wrong in a way that felt deliberate, not accidental. Evidence number 3, a timestamp glitch. I held the page closer to the bedside lamp, letting the dull yellow light skim across it. The numbers looked clean, unaltered, but the sequence didn't align with anything I remembered. The glitch wasn't a mistake. It was a narrative being rewritten. A tiny fracture in reality, paper thin, but sharp enough to cut. My pulse pounded in my throat as I compared the printed time against my phone, again scrolling through my messages to find the one I'd sent Lila that afternoon. The digital timestamp held steady, 12:43 p.m. I whispered the numbers aloud, 12:43, 12:37, trying to hear them in different tones, trying to make one of them make sense. They didn't. They hovered in the air like two truths fighting for ownership of the same moment. I set the page down carefully, flattening it across the edge of the drawer so it wouldn't crumple. My hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. The drawer itself felt like a mouth barely open holding words Nathan hadn't spoken yet. The bedroom door creaked behind me. He stood there leaning against the frame with that studied posture he wore whenever he wanted to look casual. His arms were folded, and he watched me with an expression that hovered between concern and something colder. "You okay?" he asked, his voice smooth, soft. Too soft. I stepped aside, letting him see the drawer. "Why was this open?" He shrugged lightly, strolling in like he hadn't been watching me for the last 5 minutes. "You were looking for something earlier. Maybe you forgot to close it." The line landed with the subtle force of a trap door opening beneath my feet. "I didn't open it," I said. "And I didn't print this." He raised his eyebrows with that gentle disbelief he'd perfected. "Maybe you don't remember." The room shrank instantly. The air thickened. I stared at him, trying to read the flicker behind his eyes, the tightening of his jaw when he realized I wasn't responding the way he expected. "What are you trying to say?" He sighed like he pitied me. "Just that you've seemed overwhelmed. Stressed. People forget things when they're like that." My throat tightened. "Nathan, I'm not forgetting entire actions that I didn't do. I'm just saying it's possible." The tone wasn't defensive. It wasn't angry. It was patient. That was what terrified me. His patience was always a weapon. I stepped away from the dresser, needing space from the half-open drawer and what it symbolized. Nathan moved closer, not touching me, but positioning himself where I'd have to pass him to leave the room. He looked down at the printed page with a thoughtful hum. "Well, that's odd," he said. "Does the time matter?" The question felt like a blade slipped neatly between my ribs. He knew exactly why it mattered. He knew because he put it there. My voice cracked with an edge I didn't mean to reveal. "Did you make this?" His face stilled for a fraction of a second, so brief most people would miss it, but that single pause confirmed everything. Then he blinked, smoothing his expression back into its usual calm. Why would I do something like that? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because the truth was too large to speak yet. Because if I said it aloud that he was setting me up, constructing me piece by piece into someone unstable, I'd have to face the enormity of it. He stepped closer again, and this time his voice softened into something almost tender. "Emily, you're not yourself lately." That sentence dropped into my stomach like a stone. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a message. "Lila, hey. Are you okay?" Nathan asked about you earlier. Seemed worried. My hands went cold. He'd been spreading the story quietly, seeding it, preparing witnesses. I set the phone down before he could see my reaction, but the tremor in my fingers betrayed me. Nathan saw it, and he smiled, small, soft, victorious. I swallowed hard. "I'm going for a walk," I said. He nodded, stepping aside with faux understanding, as if granting permission. I walked out of the bedroom, heart pounding against my ribs, and the half-open drawer remained behind me like a wound in the room, gaping quiet and deliberate. The timestamp numbers pulsed in my mind as I left the house, each digit whispering the same truth. He was rewriting my life in increments, small enough to deny, but sharp enough to destroy. Outside, the air felt colder than the rain. I breathed deeply, grounding myself in the rawness of it, because the fracture had deepened, and it was no longer just a crack. It was a map, a pattern, a plan, and I was finally beginning to see it. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I drifted in and out of a half-conscious fog where every sound in the house scraped against my nerves, the refrigerator clicking, the pipes settling, the faint rustle of wind brushing the siding, but underneath it all was the steady rhythm of a thought I couldn't outrun. He wasn't guessing, he wasn't misinterpreting, he was building something. I woke before dawn feeling as if someone had shaken my shoulder, even though no one had touched me. The room was pale with early morning light, and Nathan's side of the bed was empty sheets, smoothed in a way that suggested he'd been awake longer than I had. I felt a coldness fill my chest as I walked toward the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of coffee and something sharper cigarette ash. Nathan didn't smoke. The sight of the ashtray on the counter felt like stumbling into a crime scene. A thin line of gray ash rested on the rim unbroken, as if it had been placed perfectly rather than used. I touched the edge lightly and the ash trembled before collapsing inward. It wasn't a habit, it was a signal, it was placement, and it was meant to be found. My stomach tightened. I turned away and forced myself to get ready for work, though my hands shook as I buttoned my coat. I could barely grip my phone when I texted Lila asking if she had time to meet later. She agreed instantly, which only twisted the knots deeper, because I knew she was worried even if she didn't say it. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights felt harsher than usual, the rhythm of beeping monitors clashing with the jumbled pace of my heartbeat. I tried to focus on paperwork, on scheduling forms, on anything that kept my mind still, but my thoughts kept looping back to the drawer, the timestamp glitch, the grocery store, the buzzing phone. And his smile, that calm, patient smile. I needed something real to hold on to, some proof I wasn't imagining all of it. Proof came, but not in a way I was prepared for. A message pinged on my work email mid-morning, flagged as internal correspondence, immediate attention. I clicked it, expecting scheduling updates. Instead, the attachment previewed itself in a stark gray box. Memo R08. My name appeared in the header. My pulse spiked so hard my vision blurred. I opened it. The memo described an incident, an emotional outburst I supposedly had during last week's staff meeting. It claimed I raised my voice, contradicted a supervisor, and needed to be redirected for composure. The words didn't make sense. They didn't belong to any moment I'd lived. I sat perfectly still as my eyes moved through the paragraphs, each sentence tightening a psychological noose I hadn't seen coming. The memo claimed colleagues had expressed quiet concern about my stability. It referenced recent inconsistencies in behavior. It documented me, documented a version of me that didn't exist. The world narrowed into a thin corridor of disbelief and nausea as I read it again slower this time, searching for any sign it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. The initials of the supervisor who supposedly filed it there is no way they wrote this. They would have spoken to me. They would have asked questions. They would have looked worried, not formal and distant. I felt the fluorescent lights overhead flicker, and for a moment the paper on my screen looked warped, like the pixels themselves shifted under pressure. The reflection of my face in the monitor glass fractured around the edges, and the words I'd been holding inside for days rose without permission. The reflection fractures under the memo's shadow. My breath hitched. The motif wasn't symbolic anymore. It was literal. I closed my eyes as a wave of dizziness rolled through me. The memo wasn't just a fabrication, it was a reinforcement, a second pillar. A documented record meant to bolster the narrative he'd started whispering into public spaces, into conversations with Lila, into the grocery store, into me. I pushed away from the desk so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. I didn't hear myself stand. I barely felt the carpet under my shoes as I walked straight to Dr. Rowan Hale's office, my steps quick, uneven, pulled by instinct, more than logic. He looked up when I entered, adjusting his wire-framed glasses, as if preparing for a difficult conversation. "Emily," he said carefully, "I was just about to page you." My heart dropped. "Why?" He gestured to the memo printed on his desk. "This came through early this morning." I stared at it, identical to the digital copy, except the paper version felt heavier, more permanent, like it had mass. He asked me to sit. I stayed standing, unable to force my legs to bend. His tone remained clinical neutral, tinged with professional concern, but not all of it felt performative. "Can you tell me what happened during the meeting?" My voice cracked. "Nothing happened. I didn't do any of that." He watched me, measuring my tone, my movements, my breathing. The evaluation made me nauseous. I pulled air into my lungs like it hurt. "Dr. Hale, someone is rewriting my behavior. Someone is building a case." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he slid the paper toward me with 2 fingers. The memo also notes increased emotional reactivity. The hint was gentle, but it struck like a hammer. I felt myself unraveling, not emotionally but logically, like threads being pulled from a pattern I hadn't woven. "I am not unstable." I said every word deliberate. "Something is being constructed around me." He studied me again, slower this time, his expression unreadable. He wasn't dismissing me, but he wasn't believing me yet either. "Is there anyone who might misinterpret your recent actions?" The question broke something fragile inside my chest. This wasn't a misinterpretation. It was a design. I shook my head as the room's edges blurred. The scent of cigarette ash clung to my coat, reminding me of the ashtray on the counter, the trembling line of gray dust beside it. A marker, a breadcrumb, a performance. Nathan was staging my life and handing out scripts to everyone around me. When I left Dr. Hale's office, my hands were shaking so hard I had to press them against the hallway wall to steady myself. The lights above buzzed, flickering faintly. I stared down at the printed memo, the shadow it cast on the glossy floor, splitting the reflection of my shoes into uneven shapes. A glitch in the light. A glitch in the truth. Another fracture. By the time I reached the exit doors, one realization had crystallized into something sharp and devastating. Nathan wasn't just framing me in our home or in public. He was infiltrating my workplace, my reputation, my identity. If he could alter records, if he could seed stories, if he could pre-write my reactions and let the world fill in the blanks, then he wasn't trying to hurt my feelings. He was trying to erase my credibility. And he was doing it one documented lie at a time. Outside, the daylight cut into the pavement in harsh white stripes, and I walked straight into them, feeling something inside me harden. Not fear this time, but clarity edged in quiet, rising fury. I wasn't imagining anything. I wasn't losing myself. I was being rewritten, and I was finally seeing the author. By the time I reached the hospital the next morning, the air felt heavier than the sky outside, weighed down by a wet metallic drizzle that clung to everything in thin, glittering layers. The rain had soaked straight through my sleeves during the walk from the parking lot, and the fabric of my coat held tight to my arms, cold, rain-wet, uncomfortable like the world itself wanted to keep me from moving freely. I didn't bother drying it off before walking into the administrative wing. The dampness grounded me, reminded me I was still real, still here. I stopped outside Dr. Rowan Hale's office door, my pulse tapping at my wrist in a steady, deliberate rhythm. The official memo still lay folded in my bag, its crisp edges cutting against the fabric like it wanted to escape. I knocked once. Dr. Hale opened the door almost immediately, his expression thoughtful and sharp in the dim fluorescent lighting. His glasses caught a faint glare from the overhead fixtures, creating a thin line of reflection across the lenses that made his eyes seem almost hidden. "Emily," he said, voice even. "Come in." The rain-wet coat sleeve clung to my skin as I stepped inside the chill threading into my nerves. I sat down slowly, trying not to appear restless, even though my thoughts thrashed beneath the surface like something trapped. Hale closed the door behind him and walked to his desk, moving with the deliberate calm of someone who never wasted a gesture. "I reviewed the memo again this morning," he said, settling into his chair. "I also pulled the hallway camera logs from that day's meeting." My breath caught. He tapped a key on his laptop, the screen glowing in front of him. "There's something you need to see." He rotated the monitor toward me. What played wasn't the full hallway camera feed, only a fragment. Evidence number 5 frame, number 441459, a 20-second sliver of footage, grainy but clear enough to make out the details. There I was, walking calmly down the hallway, holding a folder under my arm, pausing briefly to greet someone off-screen. No raised voice, no agitation, no instability. I looked ordinary. Controlled. Myself. But then the footage cut abruptly to black. Not a fade, not a transition. A jump. A deletion. "Someone edited this," I whispered, leaning closer. Hale didn't answer immediately. "It's incomplete," he said quietly, which is unusual. He clicked through the file. Beyond frame 459, everything was gone, replaced with blank data, corrupted segments, and a 30-second gray void, the kind that happens when someone deletes selectively rather than accidentally. A shiver ran through me so sharply it felt like my spine had turned to glass. I pressed my palm against my thigh to steady myself, feeling the damp fabric cling harder to my skin. "Who pulled the memo?" I asked, my voice tight. "That's what concerns me," Hale replied. "The submission came through a routed account. Not a supervisor, not HR. The initials, they appear legitimate. But the forwarding chain is irregular. Irregular." That word stretched like an unseen wire between us. Hale studied my face for several seconds before continuing. "Emily, have you felt that anyone outside your home here at work might be influencing how you're perceived?" My breath sharpened. "Yes." He nodded once, the kind of nod that wasn't acceptance but consideration. "When I saw this fragment," he said, tapping the screen, "I thought it was best to speak with you directly." I swallowed hard, a knot tightening in my throat. "Someone is creating a pattern around me," I said. "Small things, twisted details, and now this documentation." My voice wavered. "I'm being framed." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he folded his hands and waited, not impatiently, not skeptically, but like a man cataloging every piece before forming a conclusion. "What else has happened?" he asked. I told him. Not everything. There were things I still couldn't articulate without sounding unhinged in exactly the way Nathan wanted, but enough. The grocery store, the timestamp glitch, the half-open drawer, the screenshot, the questions, the tone, the ashtray, the quiet recalibration in Nathan's eyes every time I stayed calm when he wanted volatility. Hale listened, unmoving, his expression unreadable. When I finished, silence expanded between us. Not heavy, not accusing, just waiting. Finally he spoke. "I believe your distress is real," he said, "but distress alone doesn't prove intention." His tone was careful, measured, threading professionalism through empathy. "That said, If someone is manipulating your environment or creating false records, we need to document what you've told me today." A cold shiver crawled down my arms beneath the rain-wet sleeves. "Document me." The words triggered something deep and terrified inside. Documentation had started the spiral. Documentation could finish it. "No," I said too quickly. "Not yet. Not him." My breath shook. If I file something prematurely, it will look like exactly what he wants it to look like. Hale nodded slowly. "You're afraid he'll use the complaint as confirmation." Heat stung behind my eyes. He already is. A knock sounded on the office door, sharp, unexpected, slicing through the moment like a knife. Hale lifted a hand for me to stay seated before stepping to the door. He opened it a few inches. Mara stood in the hallway. Her hair was slicked back raindrops gathering at her collar like small, perfect crystals. She looked polished, composed, too calm for someone who'd shown up unannounced at my workplace. Her eyes darted toward me before she addressed Hale. "Sorry to interrupt," she said smoothly, "but I was hoping to speak with Emily." My stomach twisted. Her presence here felt engineered, not coincidental. Her gaze held something I recognized too well, false concern wrapped in silk. About what Hale asked politely but firmly. She hesitated just long enough to expose the lie in her posture. Nathan was worried. He said she seemed fragile this week. I just wanted to check in. Fragile. The word sliced through me. Hale glanced back at me, something shifting behind his expression, something analytical, something coldly attentive. Mara stepped closer to the doorway. "Emily, sweetie," she said, voice dripping with practiced warmth. "Is everything okay at home?" Something inside me cracked, not broken, but exposed. My breaths came shallow, the room shrinking as her words aligned perfectly with Nathan's narrative. With the memo, with the clipped footage, with the timestamp glitch, with the staged concern in the grocery aisle, the walls didn't close in, they clicked into place. A structure, a plan, a coordinated effort. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the tile. "Why?" I asked Mara, my voice low. "Are you involved in any of this?" Her eyes flickered too quick, too controlled. Then she smiled, the corners of her mouth lifting in a soft, practiced shape that felt like the first shadow of a knife. "I'm just worried about you." The rain-wet sleeve clung tighter as if bracing me. I saw the truth then, sharp and undeniable. Nathan wasn't working alone, and the circle was already closing. I didn't go home after leaving Dr. Hale's office. Something in the way Mara smiled, soft, practiced, almost congratulatory, made my skin prickle with the sense that returning to that house without a buffer, without proof, without a plan, would be stepping into a stage already lit and waiting for my next line. Instead, I sat in my car in the far corner of the hospital parking lot, rain drumming on the windshield in relentless, uneven rhythms. Each drop felt like a warning, a countdown, a reminder that I was running out of time to stay ahead of whatever narrative Nathan had set in motion. I pressed my palms against the steering wheel until the leather warmed beneath my skin, grounding myself. Then I pulled out my phone and scrolled through every text, every timestamp, every fragment of digital evidence I still had access to. Patterns were emerging, minute, delicate, but unmistakable. He was adjusting reality in increments small enough to deny but persistent enough to accumulate into something lethal. I drove to a quiet street instead, one lined with old homes and overgrown hedges that swallowed sound. I didn't have a destination. I only knew I couldn't think clearly with the smell of him in the house, with the threat of his curated concern hanging in every doorway. Hours blurred. When the sky finally dimmed into early evening, I steeled myself and went back, because not returning would only feed the narrative he was building: instability, impulsiveness, emotional volatility. He needed me off balance. I needed to appear predictable. The cold doorknob bit into my palm when I opened the front door. The temperature difference between outside and inside felt exaggerated, an intentional contrast, like the house itself held its breath, waiting for me to ruin my own credibility. Nathan sat in the living room, perfectly composed, scrolling casually through his phone as though he hadn't orchestrated a psychological vice around my life. He glanced up, smile slow and warm. "Hey," was starting to worry. Worry, concern, fragile, overwhelmed, the vocabulary of a man rewriting a woman. I hung my coat carefully by the entryway, ignoring the chill trailing down my spine. "I needed some air," I said evenly. He studied me, eyes scanning, measuring, calculating. "Long walk. Just enough." He nodded as if filing that away for later use, then returned his attention to the screen. "Mara stopped by," he said lightly. "She told me she ran into you." The lie was casual, effortless. She hadn't run into me. She'd sought me out with surgical precision and a ready-made script. I kept my expression neutral. "She seemed concerned," I replied. "She just cares." "Does she?" I asked quietly. Nathan's thumb paused mid-scroll for half a second, barely perceptible, but long enough to reveal something cold beneath the surface. I moved toward the stairs. "I'm going to change." "Okay," he said gently. "Take your time." Take your time. Like I was fragile. Like I might break. Like he was already preparing to pick up the pieces. The words lingered in the space between us as I walked upstairs, each step feeling like the floor might give beneath me. In the bedroom, the air felt heavier, as if the walls remembered our earlier arguments. I opened the closet, searching for the tote bag where I kept old receipts and documents I hadn't sorted in months. I didn't know exactly what I hoped to find, only that I needed something he hadn't touched, something that belonged to me, something outside his reach. The tote bag was there buried under an old sweater, but it felt too light, too empty. My heartbeat stuttered. I tore it open. Nothing. Empty. The receipts, the old bills, the notes I'd scribbled to myself gone, replaced neatly with fresh printer paper, pristine and untouched. He had cleaned my past, erased it, curated it. The only remaining documents were ones that could be bent, spun, weaponized. My breath came sharp. I stumbled back from the closet, grasping the cold doorknob as if it were the only stable thing in the room. The metal bit into my palm so hard it grounded me, and that's when I saw it half tucked behind a stack of folded blankets on the top shelf. A receipt. Just one. Crisp, intentional. Placed so it would look like something I had forgotten, not something he had planted. I pulled it down with trembling fingers. A financial slip from an account ending in 72. Nathan's. The charge was for a consultation service. He had denied any such appointment. Evidence number 6. It was subtle, but it wasn't innocent. I checked the transaction time. It aligned perfectly with the evening he claimed I had misremembered our conversation. That wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. My pulse thudded in my ears. I took the receipt downstairs and found him in the kitchen, humming again, always humming when he wanted to seem harmless. I laid the slip on the counter. "What's this?" He glanced at it. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. A work thing. "I told you. You said you didn't do consultations." "I didn't." He answered easily. "Maybe that's from last month. It's dated last week." He shrugged. "I think you're reading too much into things, Em." The sentence was soft, gentle, and crafted to make me doubt the ground beneath my feet. My voice stayed steady. "Are you sure?" He lifted his eyes to mine. Calm, unbothered, patient. "You've been under a lot of stress. Maybe let's not spiral." Spiral. The words snapped through me like a whip. He expected me to break. He wanted me to break. And for the first time, I saw it all clearly. The public scene, the timestamp, the memo, the clipped camera feed, the concern from Mara, the planted narratives. He was building a foundation, a case, a version of me that looked unstable enough to be dismissed, doubted, controlled, or removed. I stepped back, letting the coldness inside me crystallize into something sharp and immovable. He noticed it. His eyes tightened just a flicker, but enough to confirm the shift. He wasn't concerned. He was tracking, measuring, waiting. I turned away from him, gripping the stair rail for balance, breathing through the rising clarity that felt like both a weapon and a wound. Sometimes the truth doesn't reveal itself. In the moment you're broken, I thought. But in the moment, you stop breaking. When I reached the top of the stairs, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already knew what expression he wore. Calm, patient, confident. The expression of a man who believed he was winning. The dim hallway light buzzed faintly overhead as I stepped into the bedroom again, the cold doorknob still imprinting its chill into my palm. And for the first time since this began, I felt something new beneath the fear resolve. Because now I had proof, I had a pattern, I had motive, and I had seen enough to recognize that the man downstairs wasn't just trying to twist the truth. He was trying to erase it. He was close, too close to succeeding. But close wasn't the same as done, not anymore. I didn't realize how quiet the house could become until I heard nothing at all. Not the hum of the refrigerator, not the ticking of the hallway clock, not even the faint creak of the vents settling. It was a silence, shaped like a trap, too clean, too deliberate, as though the walls themselves were holding still to observe what I would do next. I stood in the bedroom doorway with the cold aftertaste of Nathan's last comment still lingering in the air downstairs, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel foggy or frantic. I felt sharpened, stripped down, dangerous. There was a mirror shard sitting on my nightstand, left from when a cheap frame slipped from my hands last week and cracked against the corner of the table. I hadn't thrown it away. Something about the uneven edges, the fractured angles, the hard truth of it appealed to me now. I picked it up, letting the broken glass catch the dim hallway light. My reflection stared back in jagged segments, split into 3 uneven pieces. One calm, one furious, one hollow. It felt accurate. I held the shard carefully between my fingertips and let it anchor me. Every breath settled deeper in my chest as I traced the pattern of the last 2 weeks. The grocery store, the timestamp glitch, the half-open drawer, the manipulated screenshot, the memo, the clipped camera feed, Mara's sudden practiced concern, the financial slip. Each piece seemed disconnected when taken alone, but together they formed the outline of a story I was never meant to recognize. Nathan wasn't reacting to anything. He was scripting, directing, composing a version of events where he became the steady, supportive husband, and I became the unstable wife collapsing under some vague, unspoken pressure. A crisis he could manage, a narrative no one would question, a story he could win. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mirror shard in my hand reflecting a sliver of my eye in a way that made me look unrecognizable. For a moment, fear shivered through me, fear not of him, but of what might happen if I didn't stay precise, measured, controlled. I forced myself to steady my breathing. That's when my phone buzzed. The sound startled me enough that I nearly dropped the shard. I fumbled for the phone and opened the message, half afraid of what I'd find. It was from Cameron, a coworker from scheduling. The text was short, almost hesitant. "Hey, can I ask something weird? Nathan asked me again about you. Same stuff, about your reactions. Is everything okay?" A second message appeared before I could respond. "Also, I forgot to mention something from last week. Might matter." I sat straighter, breath catching in my throat. "When you two came to pick up dinner," he wrote, "I saw him doing something I couldn't make sense of. He kept steering the conversation away whenever you tried to speak. Like a loop, avoidance behavior, almost rehearsed. Evidence number 7. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, then came back into focus, each one slotting neatly into the architecture of Nathan's manipulation. Someone outside my immediate circle had seen it, had witnessed the strange, choreographed control. The story wasn't airtight. There were cracks, witnesses, places where his narrative bled. A small, trembling relief pulsed through my chest, but it was quickly replaced by something far stronger, clarity sweeping in like a cold wind. I typed a short reply to Cameron thanking him and telling him I'd reach out soon. Then I set my phone aside and pressed my fingertips against my temples. The room felt smaller again, but not because he made it so. Because I could finally see the shape of what needed to happen next. I stood slowly walking to the dresser and opening the drawer he had weaponized against me just a day before. The printed calendar page still lay inside. I lifted it with careful hands, studying the timestamp again, 12:37 p.m. That would be the piece he'd claim was an innocent mistake if I confronted him now. And he'd be ready. He always was. He'd pivot into concern, lower his voice, place a hand gently on my shoulder. Em, you're overthinking. You're tired. Let's talk about this calmly. Calm. Always calm. His calmness wasn't a virtue. It was a stage cue. I shut the drawer and walked into the hallway. The silence followed like a shadow that didn't belong to me. Downstairs, I heard the faint click of his phone being set on the countertop. He was waiting for me to come down to try again to test the edges of my reactions. Not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't giving him anything. I stepped back into the bedroom, leaning one hand against the wall as gravity shifted under my feet. The reflection of the mirror shard caught my attention again. 3 versions of me stared back, splintered but coherent. I whispered to them to myself, not yet. Not like this. I needed every piece lined up, every contradiction ready, every lie documented, every witness acknowledged, every detail locked down so completely that when I confronted him, I wouldn't show anger, or panic, or doubt. I would show truth, and he wouldn't survive it. I tucked the mirror shard under the folded edge of my pillow. Not as a threat, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of what fragmentation feels like and how it can be rearranged into something sharp. Downstairs, Nathan called my name voice warm and soft, and dipped in that falsely worried sweetness that had fooled everyone else. Em, you okay up there? I closed my eyes, let the breath settle, straightened my spine. I'm fine. I called back each word, even unhurried, impossible for him to twist. He hesitated. I heard it, the single pause where he recalculated, reassessed, repositioned. Then his footsteps moved through the living room, slow and deliberate, like a man who believed he still owned the script. But the scene had shifted. The air had changed. And tomorrow, I would be the one writing the next line. I spent half the night awake, lying still in the dark, letting my thoughts settle into something cold and organized. Not frantic, not panicked, controlled. By the time the house fell completely silent, I'd already decided what I needed to do next. The dim lamp in the corner of the bedroom, a small, old brass thing with a crooked shade, glowed faintly when I switched it on. It cast a muted yellow pool of light across the carpet like a small private stage where only the truth was allowed to exist. My fingers moved with deliberate care as I pulled out the small audio recorder I kept in my bag. I hadn't remembered recording anything lately, not intentionally, but the device still held fragments from the past few weeks. I scrolled through the files, feeling each click of the buttons like the ticking of a clock winding towards something inevitable. Then I saw it. A file dated 3 weeks ago, time-stamped 08:21 p.m. I didn't remember making it. I didn't even remember holding the device that night. But the moment I pressed play, the room tilted. At first, there was only rustling fabric brushing against something, maybe my coat, maybe my purse. Then footsteps, a door closing, and then his voice. Nathan's. Steady, practiced, rehearsing. No, you don't understand, his recorded voice said. She gets like this. You know how she is. I'm trying my best. A pause. More pacing. A soft exhale. She'll deny it. She always does. But she snapped. I swear she did. I'm worried about her. My throat tightened. I felt the air leave my lungs in one slow, stinging breath. In the audio, he wasn't speaking to someone. He was practicing, repeating lines, polishing his tone. There was a shift in his footsteps, then the sound of him settling into a chair, calming his breathing, before speaking again in that same concerned, tender voice he used in public. I just want her to get help. I want her to be okay. I'm scared she might hurt herself. The words hit like a blow to the chest. The dim lamp flickered as if reacting for me. She won't remember, he continued. She never does. A lie repeated often enough to become a script, a weapon. Then silence. A car driving by outside muffled by the walls. A faint hum from the refrigerator downstairs. And then the recording cut off. My hand shook as I lowered the device. Not violently, just enough to show how deep the shock settled into my bones. He hadn't just been twisting my words or nudging situations. He had been practicing, planning, preparing for the day he would accuse me of behaviors he rehearsed for. He didn't need me to break. He only needed to convince everyone else I had. My eyes blurred for a moment, but not from tears, from rage. Pure, crystalline, devastating rage. It didn't feel hot. It felt cold, clear, like ice forming in layers. I replayed the recording again, slower this time, dissecting every syllable, every intentional breath, every faked tremor in his voice. The perfect tone of a concerned husband, a man burdened, a man protective, a man rehearsing his own innocence. The dim lamp buzzed faintly, illuminating the corner of the room where my reflection glinted in the cracked mirror shard under my pillow. The pieces were all here, every object, every contradiction, every staged moment. This was the truth, my truth, not a glitch, not a distortion, not a misremembered detail. Evidence number 8, the final strike. With the recording clutched in my hand, I walked downstairs. The house was almost unreal in its stillness. The shadows were longer than they should have been, stretched by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. When I stepped into the living room, Nathan emerged from the kitchen with a glass of water in hand, expression perfectly composed. "You're up," he said softly. "Everything okay?" His practiced concern made my stomach twist. I held up the recorder. "What were you rehearsing?" His face flickered so quickly I might have missed it if I hadn't been waiting for it. "What do you mean?" 3 weeks ago, I said, 8:21 p.m. The flicker again, the tightening of his shoulders, the faint pinch at the corner of his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied too calmly. "Maybe you misheard something." My voice didn't shake. "I heard you." I pressed play. His own fabricated worry filled the air between us, his voice, his tone, his script. The mask slipped. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough to reveal the man underneath the one who wasn't gentle or patient or selfless, the one who had been building a lie so carefully he thought I'd never find the seams. He stepped back. I stepped forward. The dim lamp cast his shadow sharply against the wall behind him, split at the edges like something trying to separate from him and hide. "Emily," he said, voice tightening, "you're not thinking clearly." I stopped him with a single raised hand. "I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have." The air went still, heavy, electric. I watched the realization dawn in his eyes, the realization that the narrative he'd spent weeks building had just cracked. That I had proof. Not just suspicion, not just instinct. Proof. His breathing changed, shallow and uneven. Mine didn't. For the first time since this began, he was the one losing control of the moment. Not me. I slipped the recorder into my pocket and stepped past him toward the stairs. "We'll talk in the morning," I said quietly. "No," he snapped, the veneer splitting further. "We're talking now." I turned back to him, and the truth settled in my voice with the weight of something irreversible. "In the morning," I repeated, "because when we talk, it won't be just you and me anymore." His face went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came. The dim lamp buzzed faintly behind me, flickering once, twice before steadying again. And for the first time since he began scripting my life, Nathan had no lines left to say. Morning arrived without softness. No gentle light, no easing of breath, just a muted gray pressing against the windows like the sky had decided it wanted to witness what came next. I woke with the same stillness I'd fallen asleep in. Not rested but ready, the kind of readiness that settles into the bones when fear has burned itself into clarity. The dim lamp in the corner had gone cold overnight, its slanted shade turned toward the door like an eye waiting for movement. I slid out of bed, pulled the torn envelope from the top drawer of my nightstand, and laid its contents out one final time. The screenshot with the fabricated tone, the timestamp glitch printout, the memo, R08, the clipped frames of the hallway footage, the financial slip from account, 72, the message describing his avoidance loop, and the audio recording his voice rehearsing the lie he intended to tell about me. 8 pieces, 8 fractures in the false narrative he'd built. 8 points of truth that together formed the sharpest possible blade. I placed them back into the envelope carefully, the tear across its corner widening just a little, as though it understood what it carried. Downstairs, the house sat unnervingly quiet, the way an audience might fall silent before the final act. Nathan stood in the kitchen with his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, shoulders relaxed, smile faint and hopeful, too hopeful. He'd probably convinced himself that the tense air from last night could be softened with a warm breakfast and a few gentle words. He had no idea what was coming. "Morning," he said, voice warm, almost tender. "Can we talk?" "We will," I replied, "just not here." A crease formed between his eyebrows, faint but visible. "Where?" "At the hospital." The confusion in his eyes flickered into something else, caution, maybe even fear, but he masked it quickly. "Emily, we don't need other people involved." "Yes," I said, slipping past him. "We do." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I simply walked toward the door with the envelope in hand, and something in the way I moved must have unnerved him, because he didn't follow right away. He waited a beat too long before grabbing his coat. That hesitation told me everything. For the first time, he wasn't sure which version of the story he should perform. The drive to the hospital unfolded in silence. He kept glancing at me, searching for cracks in my expression, trying to gauge what I knew. He couldn't. My face belonged to someone he hadn't written yet. When we arrived, I walked directly toward Dr. Rowan Hale's office. Nathan followed his footsteps uneven for the first time in weeks. Inside the office, Hale sat behind his desk, glasses gleaming in the fluorescent light. Lila sat in one of the chairs, fidgeting with the hem of her denim jacket. And Mara, cool, composed, calculative, Mara stood near the window, arms folded. They were all already here. They had agreed to meet me. Nathan froze in the doorway when he saw them. "What is this?" he asked, voice tight and thin. "A conversation," I said. "A real one." Hale gestured for me to sit. I chose the center chair. Nathan remained standing, uncertain for the first time. I opened the torn envelope and laid the evidence out on the table piece by piece. "We're going to go through this together," I said, my tone steady enough to silence the room. "Every part of it." Nathan let out a soft laugh, strained, brittle. "Emily, this is—" "Come on. You've been under stress. You're misinterpreting." I pressed play on the audio recording. His voice filled the room. Calm, rehearsed, manipulative. The silence that followed the final click of the recorder wasn't the stunned kind. It was the condemning kind. Hale leaned back slowly. Lila covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Even Mara's posture changed, her arms dropping slightly, her expression cracking around the edges. Nathan's face drained of color. "That's taken out of context," he said, but his voice wavered. "You were practicing," I said, "and you weren't talking to anyone. You were building a story, a version of me that didn't exist, and you've been feeding it to everyone in this room." I slid the memo forward. This was falsified. I slid the camera frames next. This was edited. I slid the timestamp glitch. This was planted. I slid the screenshot. This was fabricated. Each piece landed like a strike. His composure cracked fissures spreading across the surface of his restraint. Mara shook her head slowly, whispering something under her breath. An apology, maybe, or something like disbelief. Nathan Hale said carefully, "These inconsistencies are serious. Extremely serious." Nathan's breath stuttered. You're misunderstanding. She's not well. She's been—" He reached for the narrative again, but the words collapsed before they left his mouth, because for the first time he had no stage, no lighting, no audience primed to believe him. Just evidence, just truth, just me. "You tried to erase me," I said quietly. "My credibility, my stability, my identity. You wrote a story where you were the hero and I was the problem." My voice didn't shake. "But you forgot something." He stared at me hollow-eyed. "Forgot what?" "The truth doesn't need rehearsing." Hale rested his hands on the desk. "Emily is not unstable," he said firmly. "Her narrative is coherent, consistent, and supported by evidence. Yours is not." Nathan swallowed hard, throat working against the weight of the moment. "What happens now?" he finally asked, voice barely audible. I gathered the envelope, tucking every piece back inside. "I'm leaving you," I said. "Today." He flinched like I'd struck him, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. The final blow wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, clean, precise. When I stood to leave, the others didn't stop me, didn't question me. They simply watched as the truth settled into the room with the heavy, unmovable calm of a verdict. Nathan stayed frozen in place, staring at the floor, as though the version of reality he'd built there had suddenly disappeared. And for the first time since he began rewriting my life, he looked small, powerless, exposed. I walked out of the office into the long, bright hallway, the torn envelope tucked beneath my arm, and the air felt different, lighter, clearer, honest. I had my truth back, and he had nothing left to fight with. The house felt unfamiliar when I stepped inside again, too still, too clean, too open, as if someone had lifted a film off the air and left the room sharper than they'd ever been while he was here. The afternoon light poured in from the hallway window in a long, straight line, the same angle that had sliced across the floor the night everything began to shift. But the light looked different now, honest, steady, unbroken. I stood in it for a moment, letting its warmth settle over my skin like a quiet confirmation that the world had finally tilted back into place. The wristwatch in my hand ticked softly, steady, controlled, unhurried, its weight grounding me in the present. I had found it in a drawer this morning while packing the last of my things, tucked under an old stack of receipts he must have forgotten to curate. It wasn't special, just a simple silver band with a narrow face, but it had been mine before everything became distorted. A small reminder of who I was before he tried to rewrite me. Now it marked time differently, not as something slipping away, but as something reclaimed. I walked slowly down the hallway, listening to the rhythm of the watch, letting each second settle into me like a small, deliberate truth. The rooms looked both familiar and foreign. The couch where he'd watched me too closely. The kitchen counter where his rehearsed concern first took shape. The staircase where I learned to steady my breath before speaking. None of it frightened me anymore. The shadows sat where shadows belonged. The corners no longer felt like eyes. I paused near the glass cabinet door, the same one that had shown me the first distortion weeks ago. The reflection there had always bent strangely in the light, like a warning I didn't yet understand. But as I stared at it now, something quiet and profound settled in my chest. The reflection didn't bend, it didn't warp, it didn't fracture. It simply showed me clear, steady whole. The final line of the motif rose naturally, without force, as if the house whispered it with me. The reflection settles into truth. I touched the surface lightly, feeling only smooth glass beneath my fingertips, not the rippled uncertainty I'd grown used to. And I exhaled slow, deep, the kind of breath that fills all the empty places fear once lived. Moving from room to room, I collected the last of the things that were mine. A sweater, a mug. Lila had given me a book with my handwriting in the margins. Things untouched by his hands, untainted by his narrative. Things that still felt like me. When I reached the bedroom, the dim afternoon light lay across the bed in a soft, muted stripe, the same angle as the hallway line, but gentler. Honest. I set the wristwatch on the folded blanket at the foot of the bed and rested my hand beside it. The ticking was faint, but steady, like a heartbeat learning a calmer rhythm. I thought of Nathan, his rehearsed tone, his fabricated concerns, his carefully crafted lies. I thought of the way his narrative unraveled in front of him thread by thread, truth cutting through each layer he'd stitched together. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, deeply, cleanly. Freedom, I realized, didn't always arrive with fireworks or final shouts. Sometimes it came in the simple, steady tick of a wristwatch, reminding you that your time, your life, was your own again. Downstairs, the floor creaked as the house settled, but the sound didn't make me flinch. It was simply a house being a house, nothing more. No hidden meaning, no threat in the silence. I walked to the living room one final time, standing in the doorway and absorbing the space as it truly was, not as he shaped it, not as fear distorted it, but as it existed. My home, my clearing, my afterward. I closed the last box, slid the wristwatch into my coat pocket, and picked up my keys. The metal felt warm against my palm instead of cold. The same hallway that once felt like a battlefield now looked like a path long straight illuminated by steady afternoon light. I stepped into it without hesitation. The door clicked shut behind me with a finality that didn't sting. It settled, clean, certain. I walked down the steps, breathing in the crisp air that smelled faintly of cedar and rain. My car waited at the curb. My life, real, unaltered, unmanipulated, waited beyond it. And as I slid into the driver's seat, the wristwatch ticked in my pocket with quiet assurance, marking not the end of something broken, but the beginning of something honest. I turned the key, felt the engine hum beneath my hands, and drove forward into a world where no one else got to hold the pen to my story ever again.